The helicopters falling from the sky and the missiles raining down on Gulf capitals are no longer the real story. The real story may be the chain of decisions and denials that turned a single downed US Apache into a regional inferno and possibly into one of the biggest engineered crises of our time. First, let's understand what actually happened. On 9th June, a US Apache attack helicopter crashed over the troubled waters of the northern Gulf. Within minutes, US officials confirmed the helicopter was lost, but in a twist that intrigued us at least was both American aviators were rescued alive in a rapid operation led not by a traditional combat search and rescue patrol or a special forces team, but by a debutant US Navy drone boat. The images that followed were on the expected lines. President Donald Trump condemning the shoot down and declaring that the United States must respond. And this from a leader who had recently promised to end chaos in the Middle East by avoiding further war with Iran, also from the same man who recently has been warning his closest ally Netanyahu to back down. Now, within hours of the Apache incident, US warplanes and missiles struck multiple targets deep inside Iran, billed as punishing blow against air defenses and command nods. Tehran, which for decades has been locked in confrontation with Washington and its ally, vowed to retaliate. And that retaliation did not unfold only against US assets. Instead, missiles and drones slammed into Gulf capitals, including Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, drawing countries that host American forces into the line of fire. Now, after the attacks and counterattacks, Iranian officials issued an immediate and very pointed denial. They insisted they had nothing to do with the bringing down of Apache helicopter, even as they condemned the strikes as aggression and claimed the right to respond. Now, this very chronology of events has left a glaring question at the heart of this very war. If Iran says it did not shoot down the helicopter and the US has not clearly shown otherwise, then who did? And why did a high-risk rescue suddenly become the picture-perfect test run and public debut for a new unmanned Navy asset? Well, we believe this could be one of the greatest conspiracies ever staged, a calculated plot designed to spark the flames of a war once again. Now, there could be three possibilities. First, that this was an Israeli operation designed to drag a reluctant United States back into the conflict with Iran. Second, that this incident was quietly staged or allowed by Washington itself, giving Trump the trigger he needed to hit Iran despite political constraints at home. And third, that it was a joint project, a carefully choreographed US-Israeli plan to solve multiple problems at once, from Iran's power projection to domestic political pressure in Washington and Jerusalem. So this edition of From the News Desk could prove to be one of our most consequential discussions yet. We will dwell deep into every possibility and examine how the scenarios that may ridicule, reject, or deny today may one day stand before the world as the undeniable reality. Well, the first scenario sees Israel's fingerprints on the Apache incident. For years, Israeli leaders and security officials have warned that Iran's nuclear and regional ambitions pose an existential threat, pressing the US to act more forcefully even when Washington has preferred sanctions and more of the pressure tactics. But somehow, Trump was convinced to go kinetic on Iran. Then after weeks of bombardment, he wanted restraint and believed diplomacy could actually work. But Israel wanted otherwise, and the surest way to change Trump's mind would be a dramatic attack that kills or nearly kills American soldiers, something that shocks US public opinion and removes the political cost of escalation. In fact, shooting down a US Apache is not a simple feat. The attacker needed access to sophisticated air defense or anti-air system, accurate tracking, and most importantly, detailed knowledge of US flight patterns. Israel, and more specifically Mossad, has the technology, the intelligence capabilities, and deep expertise in running covert operations across the Middle Eastern region. Not only this, it also has a long history of acting unilaterally against Iranian assets and then counting on US diplomatic and military backing when tensions spike. Under this very possibility, Mossad, possibly operating undercover or via proxy, took down the helicopter, ensure the American pilots can be recovered quickly, and allow the blame to fall naturally on Iran. Well, the US response becomes almost automatic. Once Tehran is hit, Iranian retaliation against Gulf states create exactly the wider war that hardliners in Israel have long argued is necessary to decisively weaken Iran's regional network. As of now, there is no public proof of this, but for those who see the patterns in past covert campaigns, the combination of high-profile US loss, a miraculous rescue, and an immediate march to escalation looks less like coincidence and more like a picture-perfect plan. Now, the second possibility, it was Washington's plan itself. The Apache incident was staged, exploited, or quietly greenlit by elements in the US system to give Trump the war trigger he needed at a political critical moment. Well, as we know, Trump's second term has been defined by contradictions. On one hand, he has repeatedly promised Americans that he will stop wars and won't be a part of one. But we all know what happened. In fact, the House of Representatives recently passed a resolution to limit President Donald Trump's war powers in Iran, a significant rebuke to Trump and his handling of the conflict. In that very environment, launching a fresh large-scale attack on Iran without a dramatic trigger would have invited fierce criticism from both parties and from a war-weary public. Well, a dead Apache, a near-missed tragedy, and a rescue of two American heroes, all while Iranian officials deny involvement, gives the White House exactly what it needs: emotion, anger, and a simple narrative of self-defense. The third possibility is that this was never just an Israeli plan or just a Trump plan. It was a joint project coordinated quietly between Washington and Tel Aviv. Historically, US-Israeli security cooperation against Iran has been deep and often covert, from cyber operations to joint contingency planning for strikes on Iranian nuclear and military facilities. In fact, Trump has been one of the most openly pro-Israel president, backing key Israeli positions and repeatedly urging Israel to finish its war, even as he publicly talked about wanting peace in the region. And for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, having a fully committed US president at his side in the showdown with Iran is very priceless. A joint operation solves political problems for both the parties. While Trump gets a clean Callus Bailey and appears of reluctant leadership, he can tell the Americans he did everything to avoid war until they shot down our helicopter. On the other hand, Netanyahu gets an American president who can no longer sit on the fence, who must answer to the deaths or near deaths of US personnel with overwhelming force against Tehran. Well, taken together, both leaders can present the conflict to their domestic audience as defensive, necessary, and forced upon them. In such a scenario, the Apache's flight path, the timing of the attack, and the readiness of US drone boat and the speed of political response are not just coincidences, but seems like a carefully aligned moves. And the result is what we see now. US and Iranian forces trading fire across the region, Gulf monarchies dragged into the line of fire, and a conflict that many hoped had ended roaring back to life. We may not know for years if any of these scenarios is true. Perhaps future leaks, commissions, or memoirs will reveal who really pulled the trigger, who planned the rescue, and more importantly, who decided that 10th June would be the day the Middle East was set on fire again. But remember this, when the truth finally comes out, perhaps years from now, remember that we told you first. And with that, it's a wrap on today's edition of From the News Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Yash Goyal signing off for Times Now Digital. Until next time, take care and keep watching this space for more such videos.